Breaking news on Jimmy Kimmel and autism.
ABC chose to bring back their low-rating nighttime host.
Even in today's blink-and-you-miss-it U.S. news cycle, the Jimmy Kimmel story has been dominating for days. The man himself, well aware of it.
The most anticipated monologue in late night in years.
Maybe we should change? Yeah.
His return requiring a balance between sharp attacks on the administration and an earnest approach to the killing of Charlie Kirk.
And that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man.
But pointedly, no apology for saying Trump supporters had tried to make political gains from his death.
But I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way.
One of those who thought that, the head of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr.
I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
The broadcast regulator last week urged local stations that host the ABC network to boycott Kimmel, which in turn led to the ABC Disney conglomerate suspending him indefinitely.
Although, I don't know, if you want to hear a mob boss make a threat like that, you have to hide a microphone in a deli and park outside in a van with a tape recorder all night long. This genius said it on a podcast.
And in a sign of the countervailing pressure Disney was coming under from Hollywood, Kimmel soon had a bit of help from a friend with a bit more experience in the language of the tough guy.
It sounds a little like threats and intimidation to me, Chairman.
Stop that. It's just me, Jimmy, the chairman of the FCC, gently suggesting that you gently shut the up.
I think Brendan Carr is an incredible American patriot with courage.
President Trump has been defending his FCC chairman and batting back accusations that the threat to free speech comes from the Oval Office, while also speculating about removing licenses of networks that screen content, including news programming, that is, in his view, unfair. On his Truth Social platform, he threatened further action against the ABC, saying, "I can't believe ABC fake news gave Jimmy Kimmel his job back. The White House was told by ABC that his show was cancelled." Adding Kimmel was putting the network in jeopardy by playing 99% positive Democrat garbage. That would be a major illegal campaign contribution. I think we're going to test ABC out on this.
Disney has asked me to read the following statement, and I agreed to do it. Here we go. To reactivate your Disney Plus and Hulu account.
Disney, which owns ABC, was already under pressure with a deal to acquire NFL football media assets at the mercy of the government regulator. And two companies that own about 20% of ABC stations around the country that are still banning Kimmel from their airwaves, Nexstar and Sinclair, also want Trump's FCC on side to ease the current cap on the number of local stations they can own. Kimmel, clearly keen to show his wings had not been clipped in taking on the president.
Kimmel he was fired, he had no talent. He's a whack job, but he had no talent, and more importantly than talent, he had no, because a lot of people have no talent, they get ratings. But he had no ratings.
I do tonight. He might have to release the Epstein files to distract us from this now.
From the studio audience, a sense, above all, of relief.
He's a national hero. He's standing up for our First Amendment, and America should be watching because he said some incredible stuff tonight.
I thought Jimmy was great. I think he handled it fantastically. I felt like he spoke from the heart. He was honest, and he said what we were all thinking.
Kimmel said his own thinking had been influenced by the words of Charlie Kirk's widow at her husband's memorial service.
On Sunday, Erica Kirk forgave the man who shot her husband. She forgave him. That is an example we should follow. And if there's anything we should take from this tragedy to carry forward, I hope it can be that.
A sincere hope, no doubt, but one easily lost in the polarized maelstrom of politics, money and culture that Kimmel's brief cancellation has only highlighted. Well, I'm joined now by Professor Shakuntala Banerjee, a professor of media, culture and social change at the London School of Economics. Thank you very much for joining us on this story. In one sense, it's kind of over. The presenter, Jimmy Kimmel, is back on air. ABC has reversed its decision. But what do you think it has told us about the current climate in the United States?
I'm really happy that Jimmy Kimmel has been brought onto air, because that suggests that some kinds of activism or motivation to bring people to justice can work in the current climate, which has been something that I've seen less and less over the last 10 years, for instance, in India, and even here in Europe and in the UK. We have a lessening sense of the space for people to be able to speak. So having a mobilization, albeit amongst wealthy celebrities, to bring back one of their own into the fold and to defend the right to freedom of speech and expression seems to me to be something of a success. However, I think the broader picture teaches us several lessons, the top three being that we can't afford to ignore the smaller cases. We can't just focus on the bigger cases. And what do I mean by that? I mean that over the last 3 years, we've seen a number of university professors, junior researchers, students lose their right to remain in the US, lose their right to remain in places like Germany or to speak, because they spoke out against the murder and genocide of children in another region of the world. So I think the Jimmy Kimmel case brings us light on an increasing crackdown on freedom of speech and expression, which happens below the radar and happens much, much more for people without large, solid audiences who can boycott and call for their return to their duties and their jobs.
Well, Kimmel himself was talking about parallels with other countries in his own sort of orbit, in terms of other TV hosts saying, gosh, I wish I could do what you do, drawing parallels with Russia. I mean, other people have drawn parallels with the early years of Putin, with Viktor Orban in Hungary. I mean, do you think those are valid when it comes to the kinds of levers that Donald Trump appears to be trying to pull?
I think those are not just valid, but long warranted comparisons. And we look across the statistics about the numbers of journalists who've been imprisoned for speaking their mind in countries like India, Turkey, Russia. And then we look at the number of journalists who've not been given the chance to have interviews, who've been turned down or refused bylines. In the US, we can see a pattern emerging which is very similar. And I think we need to be very careful not to think that Jimmy Kimmel's reinstatement and the widespread concern that his removal from air caused is a cause for celebration, in the sense that we can say, oh, this happened and it could only have happened in America. The crumbling of freedom of speech across the US, across the US and some of its partner regions in the last 18 months has been something that you could have said was being seeded, not just in the last 18 months, but I think in the last 10 years.
In terms of the avenues of power that President has that are available to the White House, he talks and still talks about withdrawing licenses of broadcasters. That's a pretty difficult legal option for him to take, one that many observers would say could end up in the courts for many years. But there is this other nexus that's been exposed by this case, the various overlapping business interests and the way that the regulatory arms can be used to influence them. I mean, we've seen Disney and ABC push back, potentially at some risk, as Kimmel acknowledged, to its own interests. But is that something that you foresee would be used more by this White House now?
I absolutely do. I think we have precedent for this. It may be difficult, but actually the crumbling of protections of media houses and journalists in India very suddenly between 2014 and 2019 tells us that not only can it be done, but it is being done. And it isn't just a nexus between large media houses, businesses, tech houses, and governments. And in the case of the US, you have many of the largest tech houses already having shown preemptive agreement with some extremely restrictive speech policies.
Donald Trump himself talking about the kind of news coverage he's been getting from networks, saying that it's 97% against him. Not clear exactly what metric he's using to calculate that, in areas where he won a landslide in his terms. You know, the idea that a president can be defining it in that way and promising threatening action on that basis.
It's incredibly concerning. I'm at a loss to understand why there hasn't been more worldwide concern on this issue. I think we've seen enough examples of autocracies. We've seen enough examples of places where if you make a comment about a president, which is even ironic, you end up in jail. We know that this happens in Turkey. We know that it happened under Assad. But I think we need to also be aware that there are also other avenues for disinformation going on at the same time. So to assume that there are some decisions that are purely financial, for example, is to be misinformed. Many financial decisions are a modus operandi of those who wish to censor people, but through what we might call economic censorship. So the defunding of journalism research, look, for instance, at what happened to Stephen Thrasher reporting on the pro-Palestine encampments. Look, for instance, at examples of journalists who've tried to talk about what is happening to people who are going into ICE detention. All of these show us that in parallel with these big media events which get worldwide coverage and which, of course, we should be very anxious about. I've been following the Stephen Colbert story. I think we need to be aware of all the things that are going on quietly under the radar, which make it more possible, in fact, more probable and likely that you will have a very authoritarian control of the press coming in within the next 2 years.
Okay, Professor Shakuntala Banerjee, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.